los desafíos de la transformación global. Para desarrollar en profundidad este tema, invitamos al señor Thomas Friedman, periodista y escritor de la New York Times, y a Oscar Caipo, Senior Managing Partner de KPMG en el Perú, quien conducirá la sesión.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I'm going to speak this evening about my latest book, which I hope will help you see some of the biggest trends in the world today impacting Peru, your society, your children, and the future. My book is called Thank You for Being Late, an optimist's guide to thriving in the age of acceleration. First question I always get from people is, where from comes the title? Thank you for being late. It actually comes from meeting people in Washington, D.C., where I live, for breakfast. I work out of the New York Times Bureau in Washington, and I often schedule business breakfasts downtown. And every once in a while, someone comes 10, 15 minutes late. And they always say, Tom, I'm really sorry. It was the weather, the traffic, the subway, the dog ate my homework. 3.5 years ago, a friend of mine, Peter Corcell, an energy entrepreneur, came 15 minutes late and did the usual, Tom, I'm really sorry, the weather, the traffic, the subway, the dog ate my homework. And I interrupted him and I said, Peter, actually, thank you for being late. Because you were late, I've been listening to their conversation. Fascinating. I've been people watching the lobby. Fantastic. And best of all, I just connected two ideas I've been struggling with for a month. So thank you for being late. Well, people started to get into it. They'd say, well, you're welcome. Because they understood I was actually giving them permission to pause, to slow down, to reflect. And boy, don't we need to be doing a lot of that today. Which is why my favorite quote from the front of the book is from one of my teachers, Dov Seidman, who says, you know, when you press the pause button on a computer, it stops. But when you press the pause button on a human being, it starts. That's when it starts to reflect, to rethink, to reimagine. And boy, don't we need to be doing a lot of that right now. Because my friends, you in Peru and me in America, we are living today in an age of acceleration. In an age of acceleration. And what I'm going to talk about this evening is how these accelerations are not just changing your world, they're reshaping your world. They're reshaping politics, they're reshaping geopolitics, they're reshaping the workplace, they're reshaping ethics. Yeah, we're going to talk about ethics tonight. And they're reshaping community. So the first part of my talk is about these accelerations, and the second part is about how they're reshaping your world. So I believe the three accelerations that are reshaping your world are in what I call the market, Mother Nature, and Moore's Law. Now the market for me, let me start with Mother Nature. Mother Nature, to me, is climate change. That actually is Glacier National Park in the United States in 1913, and that's Glacier National Park in the United States in 2012. By the way, that glacier had been there for 7,000 years. If you put Mother Nature on a graph, and Mother Nature for me is climate change, biodiversity loss, and population growth in the developing world, you put them on a graph, they all look like a giant hockey stick. They look like Glacier National Park 1913 to Glacier National Park 2012. They look like Lake Chad in the middle of Africa, 1963, and Lake Chad, that little blue smudge down there, 2013. They look like a graph of global average temperature, a hockey stick. They look like another hockey stick, reported instances of extreme weather. And they look like the mother of all hockey sticks, world population growth through history. If you put Mother Nature on a graph today, she looks like one big accelerating hockey stick. The market for me is globalization, but not your grandfather's globalization. Your grandfather's globalization was containers on ships and planes. That's actually pretty flat today. What is accelerating today and reshaping your world is digital globalization. The way everything is being digitized and globalized through Facebook and PayPal and MOOCs and Twitter. Digital globalization, if you put it on a graph today, looks like another giant hockey stick. It looks like total data consumed per month. It looks like mobile cellular subscriptions in the United States or Peru or Brazil or Nigeria. It looks like global internet users, another hockey stick. The last acceleration is in Moore's Law. Moore's Law was coined in 1965 by Gordon Moore, the co-founder of Intel, the chip company. In 1965, in a famous article in Electronics magazine, Gordon Moore argued that the speed and power of microchips would double roughly every 24 months, and the price would actually stay the same or go down. Moore's Law is alive and well 53 years later, and that's what it looks like on a graph, like another giant accelerating hockey stick. Now, every year, for the last 53 years, someone has written an article saying, Moore's Law is over, Moore's Law is over. And what all those authors have in common is they were all wrong. Moore's Law is alive and well today, doubling and doubling and doubling. So this PowerPoint, I suspect, is running on an Intel 14 nanometer chip. It has 37.5 million transistors per square millimeter. Your eye can't see it. Intel just began shipping under Moore's Law their 10 nanometer chip, and it has 100 million transistors per square millimeter. Now, it's very hard for the human mind to grasp what's the difference between 37.5 million transistors and 100 million. The difference is the difference between a self-driving car that needs the entire boot of the car to contain the brains of that car, and a self-driving car that will just need a little box under the front seat. Now, in their book, The Second Machine Age, Andy McAfee and Eric Bryn-Jolson tell the story, famous in Silicon Valley, of the man who invented the game of chess. And he gave the game to the king. The king loved it and said, "How can I reward you, good sir?" And the man said, "Your Majesty, I just want to be able to feed my family." King said, "Well, what would you like?" He said, "Your Highness, I'd like you to take just one kernel of rice, put it on the first square of my chessboard, put 2 on the second, 4 on the next, 8 on the next, 16 on the next, 32 on the next. Just keep doubling it, and my family will be fine." King said, "It shall be done," not realizing that when you double something just 63 times, the number you get is about 18 quintillion, more rice than existed on the planet. Well, we just entered the second half of the chessboard of Moore's Law, where the doubling and doubling power of microchips has now become so powerful, you start to see some really crazy stuff. You start to see cars that can drive themselves and computers that can defeat any human being in any game, including chess, Jeopardy, or Go. And Moore's Law is alive and well. Intel recently got their engineers to do an experiment to try to explain the power of Moore's Law. They took a 1971 Volkswagen Beetle, and they had their engineers estimate what if the Volkswagen Beetle had improved at the same rate microchips had since 1971. And they calculated if it had, the Volkswagen Beetle today would go 300,000 miles an hour. It would get 2 million miles per gallon, and it would cost you 4 cents. You'd be able to drive it your entire life on a single tank of gas. That is the power of the technological exponential now driving your life. And the simple thesis of my book is that these three accelerations in Mother Nature, in the market, and in Moore's Law, oh, friends, they're not changing your world. They're reshaping your world. Before we go into the reshaping, let me do just a little deeper dive into Moore's Law, because it's the real Uber driver of everything. My chapter on this subject is called, What the Hell Happened in 2007? What the hell happened in 2007? I know what you're thinking. What's this guy talking about? 2007, such an innocuous year. Well, here's what happened in 2007. The year was kicked off in San Francisco when a guy named Steve Jobs introduced the first one of these babies. This is actually a handheld computer with more compute power in it than the Apollo space mission, and they tell me it can also be used as a phone and a camera. That's how the year started on January 9th. In 2007, a company called Facebook opened its platform to anyone with a registered email address and broke out of high schools and universities as old people like all of you started getting Facebook pages. In 2007, a company called Twitter, you may have heard of it, broke off on its own independent platform, went global. In 2007, the most important software you've never heard of, called VMware, went public. VMware is what enables any operating system to work on any computer. It's the foundation of cloud computing. In 2007, the second most important software you've never heard of, called Hadoop, was launched into the market. Hadoop is what enables 1 million computers to work together as if they're one. I think that's called big data. Hadoop didn't invent those algorithms. They were actually invented by Google. But as Hadoop's founder, Doug Cutting, says in my book, Google lives in the future and sends us letters back home. And what Google did was leave a trail of breadcrumbs from its big data algorithm for the open source community, and the reverse engineering product was a company called Hadoop, made available to everyone. Every one of your companies is running it in the background, and it's named after the founder's son's toy elephant. In 2007, the third most important software you've never heard of, called GitHub, opened its doors. GitHub today is the largest repository of open source software with 15 million users, and for the techies among you know, in great irony, it was recently bought by Microsoft. In 2007, a company called Google bought a little-known TV company called YouTube. And in 2007, Google launched into the market its own operating system. They called it Android. In 2007, IBM launched the world's first cognitive computer. They called it Watson. In 2007, this guy up in Seattle named Jeff Bezos launched the world's first ebook reader. He called it the Kindle. In 2007, an anonymous Japanese cryptocurrency expert wrote an essay launching the world's first cryptocurrency. He called it Bitcoin. In 2007, a company called Netflix streamed its first video. In 2007, the internet, late 2006, crossed 1 billion users. Seemed to have been a tipping point. In 2007, 3 design students in San Francisco were attending the design conference that year. And they noticed that all the hotel rooms were sold out. But one of them had 3 spare air mattresses. 3 spare air mattresses, and they thought it might be cool to see if they could rent their air mattresses out to people who couldn't get hotel rooms. And it worked out so well that in 2007, they started a company called Airbnb. Yeah, it's called Airbnb because of the founding 3 air mattresses. Here's what else happened in 2007. This is a graph of the cost of sequencing a human genome. In 2001, it was $100 million to sequence a genome. In 2006, it was $10 million. And then you'll notice it goes off a cliff and collapses down to $10,000 in 2007. Solar energy took off in 2007. As did a process for extracting natural gas from shale called fracking. Between 2006 and 2008, America's total natural gas reserves increased by 35% in 18 months, an unprecedented acceleration. This is a graph of social networks. The white line going down, that's the cost of generating a megabit of data. And you'll notice the price collapses from $8 to $2 in 2007. The blue line is the speed of transmitting that data. The lines cross in 2008. That's close enough for me. Oh, my favorite graph. A graph of cloud computing. The first year we get statistics is 2008, which means the cloud was born in 2007. In 2007, Intel, for the first time, went off silicon to extend Moore's law. They introduced non-silicon materials into their microchips. In 2005, Michael Dell, the founder of Dell Computers, retired. And in 2007, he announced he had to come back to work. Turns out, friends, 2007 may be understood in time as one of the greatest technological inflection points since Gutenberg invented the printing press. And we all missed it. Why did we miss it? Because of 2008. Yeah, right when our physical technologies just took off, like we were on a moving sidewalk in an airport that suddenly accelerated from 5 to 50 miles an hour. Right when that happened, all of our social technologies, the political reform, the regulatory reform, the management reform, the education reform that you would need with such an acceleration, these all froze because we entered the greatest global recession since 1929. And in the gap between what was happening with our physical technologies and what was not happening with our social technologies, millions of Trump and Brexit voters were born. Because a lot of people got completely dislocated in the gap between what happened to our physical technologies and what didn't happen to our social technologies. So what actually happened in 2007? Well, this computer running this PowerPoint, like all computers, is made of 5 key parts. It has that Moore's Law processing chip. It's got a Moore's Law storage chip. It's got networking. It's got software. And it's got a sensor. It's got a camera. And what I trace in my book is about how all 5 of these technologies actually were all in their own Moore's Law, and they all melded together in 2007 into this thing we call the cloud. The cloud. But I never use the term the cloud in my book because it sounds so soft, so fluffy, so cuddly, so benign. It sounds like a Joni Mitchell song. I've looked at clouds from both sides. This ain't no cloud, folks. It's what I call in my book a supernova. The science students among you will know that supernova is the most powerful force in nature. It is the explosion of a star. Because what happened in 2007 was an explosion of energy, a release of energy into the hands of men, women, and machines, the likes of which we have never seen before. And it changed 4 kinds of power almost overnight. First, it changed the power of one. What one person can do today as a maker or a breaker is unlike anything we have ever seen before. We in America have a president who can now sit in his pajamas in the White House residence and tweet directly to 1 billion people without an editor, without a libel lawyer, and without a filter. Okay? Okay. I'm not going there, not going there. But you want to know what's really scary? The head of ISIS can do the exact same thing from his bunker in Syria. The power of one today to be a maker or a breaker has fundamentally changed. The power of machines have changed. Machines are acquiring all human senses. The ability to see, to listen, to touch, to feel, to manipulate, even to taste, and most of all, to reason. Oh, we crossed that line in 2011 on, of all places, a game show. The show was called Jeopardy. And that year there were 3 contestants on this famous show. 2 were the all-time Jeopardy champions. And the 3rd contestant simply went by his last name, Mr. Watson. Mr. Watson was an IBM cognitive computer. Mr. Watson passed on the first question. He let the Jeopardy champions answer it for fun. But he buzzed in before them on the second question. See if you can get it. The question was, it's worn on the foot of a horse and used by a dealer in a casino. And in under 2.5 seconds, Mr. Watson said in perfect Jeopardy style and computer-generated voice, "What is a shoe?" what is a shoe? And for the first time, millions of people watched live on television a cognitive computer solve a pun riddle faster than two human beings. And the world kind of hasn't been the same since. It's changed the power of flows. Ideas now flow and circulate and fracture and recombine faster than we've ever seen before. Where did you want to build your town in the Middle Ages? You wanted to build your town on a river, because the flows of the river brought you ideas and power and food and transportation. You wanted to build your town on the Amazon. Where do you want to build your town today? On Amazon.com. You want to build it on the source of digital flows, because they are now the source of power and energy and ideas and information. And lastly, it changed the power of many, because when men, women, and machines get this empowered, we become the largest forcing function on and in nature, which is why the new climate era has been named for us the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene. Well, my argument is that these three accelerations, these four changes in power, they're not just changing your world, they're reshaping your world. And they're reshaping the workplace, politics, geopolitics, ethics, community. So let's talk about those. Let's talk about how the workplace is being reshaped. That's at the center of all of your businesses. So when I was working on the book, I went out to Google X, Google's research arm, to meet their director, Astro Teller. His title is Chief Astronaut. And I gave Astro the thesis of my book, and he went over to his whiteboard, and he took 3 magic markers, and he drew this imaginary graph. So what's this? So that blue line across the middle, that's the average rate at which human beings and societies adapt to change over time, whether in Lima or Los Angeles. You'll notice the line has a positive slope, but it's very gradual, because that's how we adapt to change. Now the white line there, that's technology. So in the Middle Ages, that line was very flat. That's because you could go a whole century and your bow and arrow didn't get better over a whole century. There was no bow and arrow 2.0 in the 12th century. But then we got the scientific revolution, Copernicus and Galileo, and eventually Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and Intel, and the line starts to go straight north. Then Astro drew that little white diamond there. I said, "What's that, Astro?" He said, "Tom, that's where we are. We're at a point now where technology is evolving faster than the average human being can adapt to." Then he went and got another magic marker, and he drew that little dotted line there. I said, "What's that, Astro?" That's learning faster and governing smarter, to advance our adaptability to meet technology where it's going. That's the job of every Peruvian president, every Peruvian company manager, every Peruvian educator, every Peruvian governor. How do we lift the adaptation line so we can all learn faster and govern smarter and meet technology where it's going? And that's why my chapter on the workplace is called "How do we turn AI into IA?" How do we turn artificial intelligence into intelligent assistance, ANCE, intelligent assistance, ANTS, and intelligent algorithms, so more people in Peru or America can learn faster and govern smarter. So let me give you an example of each one. My example of intelligent assistance is the Human Resources Department at AT&T. AT&T, giant global telecom, competing in one of the most competitive industries in the world. Pretty good chance that whatever is going on in the human resources department at AT&T is sooner or later going to come to a company in Peru near you. So what's going on at AT&T? What AT&T does is every year their CEO begins the year with a very transparent speech about where the company is going, what businesses they're going to be in, and what skills you'll need at AT&T to be a rising employee that year. Then they take all their managers, 110,000 people, and they put them on their own in-house LinkedIn system. So let's say my friend Oscar is working at AT&T. He's in there. It says, Oscar. He gives me his academic background, tells me what jobs he's had at AT&T, what skills he's learned. Then it lists on the other column the 10 skills you need that year to be a rising employee at AT&T. Turns out my friend Oscar has 7, but he's missing 3. Then they partnered with Udacity, the online learning program, and created nano degrees for all 10 skill sets. Then they came to Oscar and said, Oscar, here's the deal. We will give you up to $8,000 a year to take the nano degrees online for the skill sets you're missing. Web page design, machine learning. And we heard, Oscar, you're interested in archaeology. You're interested in the Incas. We'll pay for a class on archaeology too. In fact, we heard, Oscar, that you're interested in computer science. We just created a $6,000 a year online master's degree in computer science from Georgia Tech. We'll pay for that as well. Just one condition, Mr. Oscar. You have to take these courses at home, at night, on weekends, on holidays, not on company time. Now, if Mr. Oscar says, Mr. AT&T, I've climbed up one too many telephone poles. I'm not interested in spending my weekends doing nano degrees. AT&T now has a wonderful severance package for Oscar. But Oscar will not be working at AT&T much longer. What is AT&T's social contract with their employees? It's very simple. You can still be a lifelong employee at AT&T, but only if you are a lifelong learner. If you are not ready to be a lifelong learner, you can no longer be a lifelong employee at AT&T. And that, my Peruvian friends, is the social contract coming to a Cusco near you. That is the new social contract. The days when you can go to school for 4 years, college, and think you can use that for 30 years, that is so 1950s. There is stuff you will learn in the first year of school here that will be outdated by your 4th year. That's why one of my teachers, Heather McGowan, likes to say, Mom, Dad, never ask your kids what you want to be when you grow up. Never ask your kids what you want to be when you grow up. Only ask your kids, how do you want to be when you grow up? Will you want to be a lifelong learner? Will you have an agile learning mindset? That's what will determine your success. Will you be self-motivated? That is the single most important life skill today. Will you be self-motivated to be a lifelong learner long after you've left home and mom and dad are not there today to say, Oscar, have you done your homework? That's my example of intelligent assistance. My example of intelligent assistant, ANT, is the janitorial staff at Qualcomm, another company I spent a lot of time with out in San Diego. Qualcomm made the inside of your iPhone with the chips and a lot of the software, not Apple. That's why Apple is always suing Qualcomm for patent infringement. So Qualcomm has a 64-building campus in San Diego. 3 years ago, they took 6 buildings and they put sensors everywhere, on every door, every light, every pipe, every faucet, every drain, every computer, every heating and cooling system. They put a sensor on it. Then they beamed all that data up to the cloud. And then they beamed it back down for their janitors onto an iPad with an incredibly friendly user interface. So if I leave my computer on or a pipe bursts above my head, the janitor knows it before I do, and all they have to do is swipe down and see how to fix it or who to call. Qualcomm turned their janitors into maintenance technologists. Their janitors now give tours to foreign visitors. What do you think that does for the dignity of a janitor? Because he or she now has an intelligent assistant enabling them to learn faster and operate smarter. Last example, the partnership between Khan Academy and the College Board. Now you may know, for those of you who studied in America, in the 11th grade of school in America, we have to take something called the PSAT exam, the practice SAT exam, that determines our knowledge of language skills, verbal and math. And then in 12th grade, we take the SAT exam to see how well we do in verbal and math, to see if we get in the college we want. Now, a lot of American parents who can afford to go out and hire a $200 an hour tutor to goose their kids' scores on the PSAT and SAT exam so they can get into Harvard or Yale. It's okay, nothing illegal about it, but it's a completely rigged game, because if you come from a family that can't afford a $200 an hour tutor, you're at a real disadvantage. So 3 years ago, the College Board, who administers this exam, and Khan Academy, the online learning portal, created a free intelligent algorithm for SAT prep. The way it now works is in 11th grade, I take the PSAT exam, I get the results back, they say, Tom, you did well in verbal. You could be a journalist, but you have a problem with math. In specific, you have a problem with fractions and right angles. It then takes me to a practice site just for fractions and right angles, just for my personal weakness. If I do well there, it takes me to another site that says, Tom, you could be in advanced math. Me? In advanced math? Nobody in my neighborhood's ever been in advanced math. Nobody in my family's ever been in advanced. No, you could be in advanced math. If I do well there, it takes me to another site that offers 180 college scholarships. Last year, 3 million American kids got free SAT prep on this intelligent algorithm. And together, they're reshaping the workplace. What about politics? How is politics being reshaped? Well, another way to think about my thesis is, friends, we're actually going through 3 climate changes at once. We're going through a change in the climate of the climate. We're going from what I call later to now. When I was growing up in Minnesota in the 50s and 60s, later was when I could clean that lake, purify that river, rescue that orangutan. I could do it now or I could do it later. Today, later is officially over. Later will now be too late. So whatever you're going to save here in your Peruvian environment, please save it now, because later is over. That's a climate change. We're going through a change in the climate of globalization. We're going from an interconnected world to an interdependent world. We're going from an interconnected world to an interdependent world. Oh, that's a very different world. In an interdependent world, first of all, your friends can kill you faster than your enemies. If Greek and Italian banks had gone under 2 days ago, this room would have been half full. Greece, Italy, they're allies. They're in NATO. They're in the EU. In an interdependent world, they can kill you. And in an interdependent world, your rival falling can be more dangerous than your rival rising. If China had taken 6 more islands in the South China Sea last night, don't tell anybody I said this, I couldn't care less. If China had lost 6% growth last night, this conference would be half full. China falling is much more dangerous to us in an interdependent world than China rising. That's a climate change. And lastly, we're going through a climate change in business because every company can and therefore must sensorize, capture all your data, analyze that data, find the needle in the haystack of that data as the norm, not the exception, optimize off that data, prophesize off that data, customize off that data, localize off that data, personalize off that data, and automatize off that data. That's a climate change. We're going through 3 climate changes at once. That's why you're all so dizzy. So what do you want when the climate changes? You want 2 things. One is you want resilience, because you need to be able to take a blow, because stuff happens when the climate changes. But the other thing you want is propulsion. You want to be curled up in a ball under your bed waiting for the climate change to pass. So when I thought about that, I thought, who do I call to learn how you get resilience and propulsion when the climate changes? And then I realized I knew this woman. She was 3.8 billion years old. Her name was Mother Nature, and she dealt with more climate changes than anybody. So I called her up, made an appointment, and went out to see her. I said, Mother Nature, how do you produce resilience and propulsion when the climate changes? She said, well, Tom, I have to tell you, everything I do unconsciously. But these are my strategies. First of all, she said, I'm incredibly adaptive. In my world, it's not the smartest who survive. It's not the strongest who survive. It's the most adaptive that survive. And I teach that lesson through a process I call natural selection. You may have heard of it. Second, she said, I'm incredibly entrepreneurial. Wherever I see a blank space in nature, I fill it with a plant or animal perfectly adapted to that niche. I'm incredibly entrepreneurial. Third, she said, I'm incredibly pluralistic. Oh, Tom, I'm the most pluralistic person you've ever met. I love diversity. I try 20 different species of everything, and I see who wins. And she told me something interesting. She told me she noticed that her most diverse ecosystems were her most resilient and propulsive ecosystems. I love diversity, she said. Fourth, she said, I'm incredibly sustainable. Everything is food, nothing is wasted. Eat, food, poop, seed. Eat, food, poop, seed. Nothing is wasted. Fifth, she said, my most resilient ecosystems build complex adaptive coalitions where all the parts of the ecosystem network together to improve their resiliency and propulsion. Six, she said, I'm incredibly hybrid and heterodox. I'm a very pragmatic person, Mother Nature told me. I'll try any trees with any soil, any bees with any flowers. Nothing dogmatic about me. And lastly, she said, I do believe in the laws of bankruptcy. I kill all my failures. I return them to the great manufacturer in the sky, and I take their energy to nourish my successes. Well, my argument is that the company, the university, the Peru, the America that most closely mirrors Mother Nature's killer apps for building resilience and propulsion when the climate changes is the party, the country, the company that will thrive in the age of acceleration. And since I was writing my book when Trump was running against Clinton in 2016, I invented Mother Nature's political party to run against Clinton and Trump based on these principles. It is an 18-point platform. I don't have time to go into it now, but suffice it to say, on some issues, Mother Nature is to the left of Bernie Sanders. She would believe in universal health care and universal lifelong learning. because she would understand if we don't strengthen our safety nets and trampolines to bounce more people into the game, a lot of people are not going to make it. But at the same time, Mother Nature would be to the right of the Wall Street Journal editorial page. Oh, yes, she would, because Mother Nature would abolish all corporate taxes. But she'd replace them with a carbon tax, a tax on sugar, a tax on bullets, and a small financial transaction tax. She would understand we have to tax all our bads because we can't afford our bads anymore. Unfortunately, in our politics, if you're for radical entrepreneurship, you're never for stronger safety nets. And if you're for stronger safety nets, you're never for radical entrepreneurship. What would Mother Nature call that? Stupid! That's what she'd call it, because she would understand you can never be resilient and propulsive unless you bring these two together. Let me talk to close about two areas that you probably haven't thought a lot about but are affecting your life. How is geopolitics being reshaped? Yeah, geopolitics is being reshaped. How is it being reshaped? Well, very simply, across the world for centuries was governed by empires. And basically, in the 19th and 20th centuries, we divided all these empires up into nation states. And in 1950, we woke up and we discovered we had 192 nation states in the world. So the 50 years after World War II were a great time to be a weak little nation state. Oh, if you were a weak nation state then, that was a wonderful era. Why? Because there were two superpowers out there, Russia and America, throwing money at you, building your army, educating your kids at Patrice Lumumba University in Moscow or Ohio State in America, giving you foreign aid. It was a good time to be weak. At the same time, climate change was very moderate. Populations weren't growing much. Nobody had one of these to question whether the country next door was doing better. And China was not in the World Trade Organization. So everybody in Peru could be in the textile business. What happens in my age of acceleration is all of those go away. Now no superpower wants to touch you because all they win is a bill. Number one, climate change is now hammering countries. Populations are exploding. The population of Africa is going to double by 2050. Everyone's got one of these to compare their leader with the country next door, and also to see that, wow, Paris, Phoenix, they look kind of good. Oh, and what's that over there? That's a human trafficker app that can get me there. And lastly, China's in the World Trade Organization. So nobody can be in the textile business anymore. I was in Egypt for the revolution, Tahrir Square. I was there for 3 weeks. At the end of 3 weeks, I went home. I was at Cairo airport. I went into the Treasures of Egypt souvenir store at the airport to buy my little wife something to remind her where I was. Let's see, what do they have here? Pyramids, ashtrays. Oh, my honey doesn't smoke. Oh, they've got Sphinx bookends. My honey has bookends. Oh, what did they have here? A stuffed camel, and if you squeezed its hump, it honked. My wife didn't have a honking humped camel. So I picked it up, turned it over, and what did it say on the bottom? Made in China. Yeah, you're the lowest wage country in the Eastern Mediterranean, and there's now a country half a world away that can make your honking humped camel cheaper than you can ship it and sell it for a profit. As a result of all these changes, friends, a lot of countries are just blowing up, or they're hemorrhaging people. They're called Venezuela. They're called Syria. They're called Afghanistan. They're called Libya. They're called Guatemala. They're called Honduras. They're called El Salvador. And what they're doing is creating vast zones of disorder. And the biggest geopolitical trend in the world today are the millions of people trying to get out of the world of disorder into any world of order, like Peru, like America, like Italy, Greece, Spain, Germany. And it's completely changing the politics of the world of order, creating populist, nationalist backlashes. Let me conclude by talking about the last area that's being reshaped, part of the theme of your conference here, and that's ethics. Ethics. How are ethics being reshaped? Well, very simply, can you stop that from blinking, whoever's ever doing that? How ethics are being reshaped is that my chapter on the subject is called, Is God in Cyberspace? Is God in cyberspace? Best question I ever got on book tour. 1999, I'm selling my book, Lexus and the Olive Tree. I'm in Portland, Oregon, at the Portland Theater. Comes question time. Young man stands up in the balcony and says, Mr. Friedman, I have a question. Is God in cyberspace? I said, I have no idea. And I felt like a complete idiot. So I got home, I called my spiritual teacher. He's a rabbi I got to know when I was the New York Times correspondent in Israel. His name's Svi Marks, a brilliant Talmudic scholar. He now lives in Amsterdam, married to a Dutch priest, interesting character. I called him up in Amsterdam. I said, Rabbi Marks, I got this question, is God in cyberspace? What should I have said? He said, well, Tom, in our faith tradition, we have two concepts of the Almighty. One is a biblical concept. The Almighty is almighty. He destroys evil and he rewards good. And if that's your view of God, he sure isn't in cyberspace, which is full of pornography, gambling, cheating, lying, people smearing one another on Twitter, and now we know fake news. But fortunately, he said, we have a post-biblical view of God. And the post-biblical view of God says God manifests himself by how we behave. So if we want God to be in cyberspace, we have to bring him there by how we behave there. Only we can bring God into cyberspace. I really liked his answer. I put it in the paperback edition of Lexus and the Olive Tree that came out in 2000, where none of you saw it, and it sat there for 16 years. I started writing this book, and I found myself retelling that story. And finally, I sat myself down and said, why are you retelling that story? And the answer became obvious to me for two reasons, and one just happened. I think in the last year and a half, you all, people in the developed world, in the developing world, of a certain economic means, we all began living 51% of our lives in cyberspace. Yeah, that's where we now go to buy a book, buy a house, get our news, send our pictures, get our pictures, do our banking, do our brokerage. You're now living 51% of your life in cyberspace. And what's my definition of cyberspace? My definition of cyberspace is that it's a realm where we're all connected and no one's in charge. We're all connected and no one's in charge. There's no stoplights in cyberspace. There's no police. There's no courts. There's no 1-800, please stop Putin from hacking my election. But that's where you're living your life now. In other words, you're living 51% of your life in a realm that is fundamentally God-free. And at the same time, because my three accelerations, we're now standing at a moral intersection we've never stood at before. You see, in 1945, we entered a world where one country, post-Hiroshima, one country could kill all of us. I believe in the age of acceleration, we're entering a world where one person can kill all of us. And at the same time, at the exact same time, where all of us could actually fix everything. We've never been in this world before where one of us could one of us could kill all of us. And all of us now, if we put our minds to it, we actually have the technological power to feed, house, clothe, and educate every person on the planet. We've never been to this moral intersection before where one of us could kill all of us and all of us could fix everything. And what does that mean? It means we've never been more godlike as a species than we are today. Well, put those two together. You've never lived your life more in a realm that's God-free, and we have never been more God-like. What does that mean? It means that what every person in your society thinks, feels, and believes now really matters. And it means that as a minimum, every person needs to embrace the golden rule. And every religion and culture has their version of it. Do unto others as you wish them to do unto you. Because you now live in a world where more people can do unto you farther, faster, deeper, cheaper than ever before. And you can do unto others from Peru farther, faster, deeper, cheaper than ever before. Putin did unto us in our last election from far away. Everyone needs to be in the embrace of the golden rule. I know what you're thinking. I actually gave this part of my talk as the graduation address at Olin College of Engineering a couple of years ago. And I told the parents there, I know what you're thinking. You paid $200,000 for your kid to get an engineering degree. And who do they bring in as the commencement speaker? Some knucklehead advocating the golden rule. Is there anything more naive? And what I told them is what I will tell you. In this age of acceleration, naivete is the new realism. Because I'll tell you what's really naive. And the previous speakers alluded to this. In a world where men, women, and machines get this empowered, if everyone is not in the embrace of the golden rule, we are going to have a real problem. Where does the golden rule come from? Two places: strong families and healthy communities. Strong families and healthy communities. I don't have time to talk about the last, maybe Oscar and I will, but that's why my book actually ends up in Minnesota, in the little community where I grew up, where I learned the golden rule. And the reason the book is called Thank You for Being Late is because it's in praise of everything old and slow. The faster the world gets, the more all the things you cannot download, all the things you have to upload the old-fashioned way, good parenting to good child, good teacher to good student, good bureaucrat to good citizen, good boss to good employee, all that old stuff that goes into the golden rule, that matters more than ever the faster the world gets. So my talk and my book end with a theme song. My book has a theme song. I actually explored if I could buy this song, so when you open my book, it would play this song like a Hallmark card plays Happy Birthday. The song is by one of my favorite singers, Brandi Carlile. She's a great country folk singer. And the song is called The I, E-Y-E. And the main refrain is, I wrapped your love around me like a chain, but I never was afraid that it would die. You can dance in a hurricane. You can dance in a hurricane, but only if you're standing in the eye. You see, my three accelerations, they're like a hurricane. We have politicians all over the world who tell us they can stop the wind. They're trying to stop the hurricane. What I'm selling is actually an I, the healthy community that moves with the storm, draws energy from it, but creates a platform of dynamic stability, like riding a bike, that can move with the storm. And the healthy community is the place where everyone can feel connected, protected, and respected. I believe the great struggle in Peruvian politics and American politics and European politics is going to be between the wall people and the I people. And my book is a manifesto for the I people. Thank you very much. Is that okay? Thank you.
Mr. Friedman, please take a seat. We are going to do the survey, the one-word survey. So I'm going to switch to Spanish. Don't worry, we're going to say only good things. Si pueden entrar a la aplicación y la pregunta es, escojan una palabra. ¿Qué sensación te genera la creciente velocidad y los desafíos de los cambios relevantes expuestos por Thomas Friedman hoy? Una palabra, al final vamos a presentar el resultado. Voy a pasarme inglés, así que los que hablen inglés y quieran entender mi inglés podrían usar traducción simultánea también. Okay, we're getting back to the Q&A session. May I call you Thomas? Thank you.
Anything you like.
Okay, as you were here in the audience while we were discussing on integrity, one of the most important matters, problems that we need to solve in Peru, and one of the main root causes has to do with the lack of solid institutions. My question is if you believe that these three interconnected changes and the reshaping of the work, learn, geopolitics, community ethics, will this help a country like Peru to overcome this problem?
Well, you know,
create more issues?
You know, Oscar, sometimes people ask me, what's your favorite country in the world? So I get to travel a lot. And I was just in my favorite city in the world, which was one sort of a country. It's called Hong Kong. And whenever I look at Hong Kong, it actually physically manifests the kind of values you're talking about. Hong Kong is a combination of incredible Chinese entrepreneurial energy bounded by British rule of law. And when you get rule of law, when you get incredible energy shaped by rule of law, you get skyscrapers that touch the heavens. And the place literally explodes out of the ground. But when you get entrepreneurial energy without rule of law, you get smaller buildings because so much is leaking. So much energy leaks here and there, okay? And so to me, the most successful societies in the world today are those that can combine entrepreneurial energy with real rule of law. And I think it's a great challenge we still face in America. It's a great challenge I think Peru still faces. And that's what I heard you talking about before. There's, you know, I've been to Peru twice, but in the times I've been here, and I'm not just saying this, this is such a rich culture, an old civilization, but incredibly rich culture, art, food, music, dance, everything, architecture. So obviously there's incredible energy, you know, coming up out of this place. But I think too much has been leaking, and you're underperforming what is your natural energy source because it's leaking because of the absence of enough rule of law.
Let's stay on the global front, on global trade. I understand it's one of your favorite topics. With the U.S. Trump in a protectionist agenda, China with Xi Jinping now becoming kind of a champion of free trade, which is contradictory. China is also moving very fast in investing abroad, in securing resources, and also construction, filling the space of Brazilian construction companies in the region, and also their banking system accompanying their business. We have a similar presence now in Peru in the last years. What do you foresee is going to be the outcome of this trade war between the US and China? And do you think that China is going to race beyond the trade to, let's say, try to also win on the technology front by imposing their standards, like artificial intelligence, for example?
So I suspect at the G20 in Argentina, if I have to bet, I bet there'll be some kind of ceasefire, between Trump and Xi Jinping. But it will only be a ceasefire. I think it's pretty safe to say, for those of you who read me, that I disagree vehemently with every single thing Donald Trump thinks, believes, says, and feels, except one thing: his stance on trade with China, which I am supporting. Why? So in my view, and by the way, I'm not in the bash China school. I've always been very pro the US-China relationship. In my view, China got rich since 1979 using three basic tools. First, incredible energy, focus, hard work, delayed gratification, saving, infrastructure building, and education. Chapeau, really, you have to take your hat off to them. The energy they put into that, number one. That was tool number one. Tool number two was stealing intellectual property, forcing technology transfer, non-reciprocal trade arrangements, and cheating on WTO rules. Number three was the US Navy, because the US Navy's presence in the Pacific assured every country around China that China could dominate them economically, but would not dominate them geopolitically. Those three things made, in my view, China's success. And their success, metaphorically, was in going from 0, basically, to 60 around basically T-shirts, toys, tennis shoes, and solar panels. If we let China use that same formula on artificial intelligence, supercomputing, biomaterials, aerospace, we're crazy. We're crazy. This fight had to happen. I do not want this to be a war. I do not want this to be a Cold War. But you cannot allow such a big player to be playing by its own rules. And so I am standing, I don't agree with Trump's strategy even on this, but his basic gut instinct is that we have to have this fight now before China is too big and it's too late, in my view, is right. I wish we had a different president negotiating this, but his basic instinct is right. And China's biggest intelligence failure in the last 30 years was thinking that talking to Henry Kissinger, Wall Street, and the big traditional China hands in America was giving them the accurate view of America. When people like me are standing with Trump on this issue, China has a problem. So.
Thank you. Let's stay on the international system and on democracy. I was lucky to attend a program in Georgetown a couple of years ago. I was invited there. I don't know how I ended there. It was run by the School of Foreign Affairs, which is not my field. But it was very interesting. We discussed the most relevant global issues and trends. It was actually right before Trump's election. Some of the topics that generated more interesting discussions were those focused on globalization 3.0, democracy and rule of law, and the future of international system. With all the changes that are going on now and the acceleration, do you think that we are approaching important changes in the international system? Do you think that democracy will prevail after all the turbulent times we're living?
Well, it's a very important question, Oscar, and if I just look at my own country, I have to say that there's only one thing worse politically, in my view, than one-party autocracy, and that's one-party democracy. One-party democracy is actually the worst system in the world. You see, if you have a one-party autocracy like China, and you have a reasonably intelligent leadership, they can actually order a lot of good things from the top down, and you have to give China credit for that. But when you have what we have in America today, one-party democracy, that is one-party rules and the other does everything it can to block that party.
I know that.
Yeah,
we know that.
Yeah, you may know that kind of system. Frank Fukuyama calls it veto-ocracy, not democracy, because the other party just vetoes what the ruling party does, so you have one-party democracy. In one-party democracy, you can't get anything done. And when you can't get anything done for a decade, and you're living in an age of acceleration, you have a real problem. We have a real problem. We have political corruption. Our Congress is a forum for legalized bribery. I don't know about your Congress, but our Congress is a forum for legalized bribery, given our campaign finance laws. And that kind of system, over time, that's how great nations become poor.
Thank you. Well, now we're talking for 10 minutes. It seems like I know you for a lifetime, so can I call you Tom?
Do you call me Tom, Tommy,
It's the age of acceleration.
Joe Bob, whatever you like, Juan,
Let's move
Oscar?
to sustainability. No, Oscar is fired. He's looking for a job. Moving to sustainability, the Sustainable Development Goals and the Agenda 2030. You know, Peru, we are a mid-income country. We have a lot of problems to solve: insecurity, poverty, malnutrition, education, infrastructure gaps, etc., etc., etc. On top of that, we have 70% informality in the economy. So how can we make a case for sustainability in such a condition?
It's a very important question, Oscar. I can only tell you, because I don't know enough about Peru, but I'll tell you how I make the case for sustainability when I go to Oklahoma, heart of American oil and gas country. This is the argument I make. I say to the oil and gas people there, I believe in climate change, you don't, fine. That's between you and your beach house. Let's keep that over here for a second. We'll not talk about climate change. But I bet there's something we can both agree on, and that's math. That 2 + 2 = 4. And we can both agree that there are now 7.2 billion people on the planet, and according to all the math projections, there will be 8 billion by 2030. There's going to be another billion people here in like a decade, another billion. Now, if all of those billion in Peru or Pennsylvania want to live in American-sized homes, eat American-sized Big Macs, and drive American-sized cars, we are going to burn up, choke up, heat up, and smoke up this planet faster than Al Gore predicts. That's just a math question. Energy times mass. What does that mean? It means clean energy, clean power, energy efficiency, clean water have to be the next great global industry. The 4 zeros: zero emission vehicles, zero waste manufacturing, zero energy buildings, and zero energy power. They have to be the next great global industry, otherwise we're going to be a bad biological experiment of Mother Nature. Well, who thinks Peru or America can thrive in the next decade and not participate in the next great global industry? Please raise your hand. Please raise your hand. Oh, but climate change is a hoax. Well, maybe it's a hoax, but if we prepare for climate change, if Peru does everything it can to preserve its environment and prepare for climate change, and climate change doesn't come, you will be like a Peruvian marathon runner who prepares for the Olympics but never runs the race. You'll be thinner, more muscular, more healthy in every possible way. And if we don't prepare for climate change and it comes, you'll be dead. So, which part of this sentence don't people understand? There is absolutely no economic rationale for not participating in the next great global industry. And a country that's so dependent on tourism, to despoil your environment so that I won't want to come down here with my family or you won't want to take your family there, would be the most uneconomic thing you could possibly do. You know, I have a friend, Rob Watson. He invented green buildings, the green building rating system. Rob always likes to say, Mother Nature, she's just chemistry, biology, and physics. That's all she is. You can't talk her up, you can't talk her down, you can't say, Mother Nature, you gotta understand, Peru, we're in a recession. We've gone through 5 prime ministers. We need to take a break. Mother Nature is going to do whatever chemistry, biology, and physics dictate. And to put it in American terms, she always bats last. And she always bats 1,000. Do not mess with Mother Nature. And that's what we're all doing.
Thomas, thank you very much for sharing all your insight related to your latest book. Thank you for being late. We end this session right on time or a little bit late for the next cocktail. So again, a round for applause for Thomas Nelson.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Great. Thank you. Thank you. Really appreciate it. It was great.
Nos sumamos al agradecimiento a Thomas Friedman y por supuesto también a Oscar Caipo por su participación.